What's up guys? This is Evan with Backwoods Adventure Mods. Today we're going to walk through an installation of our Hi-Lite front bumper for the 4th gen Tacoma, which is the 24 to current model. This is compatible with all drivetrains and trim levels, and we offer it in 3 variants, and that's the full bull, the pre-runner, and the non-bull, which is what we're going to install today. Let's take a closer look. If you've been following along for a while, you'll know that our Hi-Lite series got its name because it's high clearance and lightweight, and we achieved that by doing this 2-piece hybrid design. So by that I mean that the winch cradle is steel, really strong. That's your attachment point to the frame, houses the winch, and it also has your recovery points, which are 3/4 inch thick steel. Then the outer shell is aluminum, and that's extra light, but it's good and thick. It's got some gusseting, so it's really strong where it needs to be. And also anytime you get rock chips or anything like that from the trail or the road, it's aluminum, so it's not gonna rust. Let's go over some of the features. We designed it to house up to a 12,000 pound winch. We also designed it with airflow in mind, so there's enough airflow holes in the front bumper to meet the factory requirements. Also, with airflow, a lot of these models have the active grille shutters that open and shut, and we have a solution for that we'll go over during the installation. Speaking of airflow, in these airflow pockets, we have this neat little wire hider, and this is a little chase for the parking sensor wiring harness. And not only does it keep them out of sight, it protects it from being damaged by the winch rope. The bumper is compatible with your front camera, as well as your parking sensors, and it's going to house most of your standard LED off-road fog lights. And if you want to add lights to the top like we did in our shop truck, this is aluminum, so it's easy to drill in. When you open the box, you'll have your hardware as well as the bumper, some trim. Installation tools are just going to be basic, metric and standard socket set, a few wrenches, and something to cut the plastic with, something to measure and mark the plastic with. Now that I've said everything I'm supposed to say, let's have some fun and cut this truck. Before we get to the good part, here's a brief overview of what we're going to do. We're going to start by doing our measuring and marking with everything on the truck. Then we'll take the front clip off. We'll prep the truck, which is basically getting our grille shutters ready and putting the winch cradle on. Then we'll do the cut. Then we'll reinstall the plastic part that we're keeping, and then we'll put the bumper shell on. The measuring, marking, and cutting isn't hard, but it is tedious, and that's because this is such an abstract shape that it's going to take quite a few little measurements. But I'm going to walk through these one by one. Feel free to pause between each measurement. We're going to start on the outside and work our way in. And after we have all these individual measurements, we're going to basically connect the dots with some tape and cut. So for our first one, there is a line within the headlight here, kind of where it goes from black to clear, and I've highlighted it with a piece of tape because it doesn't show up well on camera. We're going to use that corner as our starting point. And we're going to measure straight down to the back edge of this fender flare, and you're going to allow yourself a bend in the tape measure where it bends around this, and we're going for right at 13.5. And you can see I have my tape measure on the back side of this point, and I'm on the back side of the fender flare. So 13.5. Next, we have the point where the top of the fender meets the headlight, a nice sharp point. So I'm not going to bend the tape for this one. I'm just going to hold this so that it's level with the top point, and we're going to come down 8.5 inches, and I'm going to put a mark on the fender flare side and the fender side. By the way, these measurements are such that this is the longest you would cut it. If you don't cut above that line, you're going to be safe. In fact, chances are you may need to trim up another 1/8 or 1/4, so don't be afraid to use these as your actual cut, but don't cut above them until you've done a test fit. Okay, next we have the gap between the headlight and this sharp edge. So again, I'm not going to bend the tape, but I am going to hold it to where the tape would go between the headlight and the bumper cover here. I'm going to go down 6 1/4 and make a mark. This is where they really start to get tricky. So we are going to use this same gap between the bottom of this portion of the headlight and the bumper cover, and we're going to measure down 7.5 inches. And I found it easier to hold the tape measure upside down. Okay. As a check, this isn't the most critical one, but I did notice that it's almost exactly 1.5 inches measuring on this black plastic piece from this point down to where the cut's going to be. And that is a diagonal measurement, meaning don't come straight down. It's 1.5 inches as you measure this way. So I did put a line there. You've got a really defined line coming around this corner here, where this part of the grille meets the bumper cover. You're going to come basically straight down 1 inch and make a line. This is the hardest one, or the most difficult one to get, because it takes several measurements because we're on a big, rounded, smooth, almost flat surface. So I've circled the point we're going to measure from. It's hard to describe, but it's where a few different body lines come together. We're going to come down 2.5 inches and make a nice wide line. Then we're going to intersect that with another measurement. We're going to come from our bottom mark here, 8 3/4, and make a nice long line that's 8 3/4 long. So where those two lines intersect is going to be the point that you use. This is also a little bit tricky. This is more of a check than anything because you are going to use a straight edge in a minute to come up with this line as well. But as a checkpoint, from the bottom, from this point, which is hard to measure from, but roughly 7 3/4 along this edge. So where the tape measure says 7 3/4 and intersects with this edge, you should have a little mark. The last real measurement we can get is this last vertical rib inside this grill area. We're going to measure over 2 inches and put a mark. Also, if you look underneath it, just a little bit lower, there is a rib that you can see on the underside, and your mark is going to line up with that lower rib. The last part is kind of double checking that this is a good line. You're going to use a straight edge and position yourself directly in front of the truck, kind of like the camera angle is right now. And you're going to hold a straight edge up, and I can't get my head there with the camera as well, but grab a straight edge and make sure that you've got a nice straight line from here to here, and double check. Again, if you're worried that that isn't perfect, cut it a little long. I'd rather you have to cut it 2 or 3 times. Once you have all these points, use a straight edge and connect the lines, and repeat on the other side. When I add the tape to the lines, that's really when it becomes easier to see your straight edge. It doesn't matter if you put the tape above your lines or below. For me, the way I see it, it's easier for me to put the tape below the lines. I can visualize that top edge a little bit better. After you put the tape on, stand back and make sure that this cut, at least from this point out, looks plainer. If it has any ups and downs, this is your time to adjust it. It's really easy to do when you have the tape on. You can see if it's not perfect, and you can move it bit by bit until, as you sit back kind of level with your cut, it looks like a nice plainer surface. So I'm going to put my tape on my marks first, and then I'll step back and see if I think it looks good. This section through here is going to be probably the trickiest part to mark and cut, because instead of a vertical surface, this one is almost parallel to the ground. So it's tricky to get some tape in there. I'm going to do my best, but ultimately I'm probably just going to cut it a little long and then trim up to it. So as you come through here, this is a really funky shape, but as you bring yourself down almost in plane with it, which is a pretty low angle, you can see that this top edge becomes really flat and planar. Now, I don't think it's absolutely perfect. I think I'm probably a little bit high and a little bit low. It's really hard to tell, but I know that this is definitely close enough, and I feel like this is good and planar. I'm going to go ahead and cut right at the top of my tape later after I take this off. So now I'm going to repeat on the other side. Now, you won't have all these measurements and lines drawn on your truck, I don't think. I used a dry erase marker for anybody who's wondering. I'm going to go back through just because it was only dry erase the first time, and I'm going to put a thin line at the top of my tape all the way around with permanent marker. And that's in case I mess up my tape while I'm taking this off. I'll still have a good mark to cut by later. Now we're going to take this whole front clip off. So that's the grill and the bumper cover and everything. Mainly you're going to need a 10mm socket and some sort of little trim tool. Toyota, if you're watching, we want hood struts. This is silly. These little clips are awesome. You just push down in the center. You don't even need a tool if they're new like this. Whoops, don't lose them. This little airbox entry thing will need to come out as well. Next, we've got 3 wiring plugs. 2 are on the passenger side. The clip for this one is on the underside. Okay, then there's 1 on the driver's side. Next, we'll take out these 10mm bolts. Now we're over here in front of the driver's tire, and the passenger side is going to be a direct mirror of this, so I'll just show you the one side. But we have some 10mm bolt heads here and here, and there's one that's hidden, aiming straight like up and out, that you can feel and see from the inside pretty easily. And these little clips are kind of neat. With the slot, you turn them 90 degrees and then they'll pop out. Moving around to the underside, there's a few more 10mm. We'll peel that out of our way. And now we're going to snap this fender flare just partially off. I'm going to have to move my tape so that it can separate. And there is a sneaky little screw right in here. It's a little Phillips. I'm having to use a screwdriver here because Ethan came in and took the impact. We've got a few on the underside, also 10mm. There are 2 bolts, one here, and the same thing on the other side. It's a lot cooler if you don't drop the screw, but you'll be able to find it if you do. Now we're ready to take it off. So really the only thing holding it on now is that it's kind of snapped in around this edge here. So I'm just going to get behind it and pop it outward. Same thing on the other side. Next we're going to take this off. You don't have to take out all these purple bolts, but grab a 17mm socket and take down the lower 2 and top 2 nearest each frame rail, so on each side. And by the way, you're going to want to save a few of these for the install. Look at this. What is this? Comes off, right? Ah, there. Look at that. If your wife's upset with how much you spent on the bumper, you say, look, sweetie, I know we just spent a lot on the truck. Here's a gift. You can plant some flowers in this. Okay, we're looking at the back side of everything we just took off. The top's here, the bottom's here. We're not going to reuse any of this, so you can release these tabs now. You lift up, and from one end to the other is the way to go. And set it aside. Now we're going to take the active grille motor out. So this little motor inside here controls these shutters between an open and shut position. We don't need that. We're going to get rid of that functionality, but we don't want to throw a code or have a light on your dash. So we have a little arm that we're going to stick in that motor, and that will simulate the open and closed position of the shutters. To get this little guy out of here, we've got to do a bit of disassembly. So you can either take all the shutters out, and you do that by pushing down these little tabs on the outside, lifting up, and then pulling it out. There's a little tab. You can do that for all of them, or we can just release this spine looking thing. So you can use a little pick or a screwdriver and raise these tabs up, and that will separate this backbone from everything else, and we'll lift it out of the way. You can see this is the one that's attached to the motor. This one drives all the others with the linkage system, so we do want to pop that one out. We're going to go ahead and take this whole shutter frame and flip it over so we can access the rest of it. It is plugged in, so I'm going to release this clip, grab a 10mm socket, we'll take these out. This is the keeper that keeps that motor in place. So you're going to lift up on this and it'll slide out. I had the shutter in the way. Now it should lift out of this end, and that end just pops out with a little tab. We'll take the wires out. We'll be done with this step. Set this aside. When we cut the bumper, we're going to cut, somewhere from this area down. So we need to remove anything electronically that's below that line. So that includes the parking sensors, fog light harness if you have it, and anything else that's attached below that point. So things like this little sensor, we're just going to release from its clips and let it hang. We're going to unplug the fog lights and also detach the wiring harness anywhere that it's connected. Probably this one too, because that's really close to the cut. When it comes to the parking sensors, we're going to take the housing and everything. We're going to use VHB tape, basically just like they have from the factory, and reattach the entire housing inside our bumper. So the only thing that's important to note is which way these are facing. My favorite little trick is to put an arrow that points up. That way it's easy. There's only one way to put them in. I'll get these inners after I take them out. I can't get them with my paint pen yet. Then you can use a scraper, your trim tool, or a screwdriver. Just kind of get under this edge and start working loose that factory tape. There we go. To get these inner two sensors, I could probably reach in there and pry them loose, but that seems a little rough. I'm gonna unclip this front section here. I'm gonna unclip this piece so that we can access that. And to do that, there are a bunch of little clips along here and some Phillips head screws. And I wish I knew where Ethan was with that driver. Not all these need to come out, but I honestly can't remember which ones are necessary and which ones aren't, but it doesn't matter because we're gonna cut all this off anyway, so no problem with taking out too many. Once you get a few of them started, you can just kind of pop it out from the front side. Okay, and with that, everything below our cut line is disconnected and out of the way. We're just gonna leave this here for now and we'll prep the front of the truck. Do grab your shutter motor. We're gonna prep the front of the truck. If you have a hybrid, you'll have a little speaker looking thing hanging here from probably this bolt, I think it is. If you do, take this bolt out, flip that speaker backwards and put it back in with the same bolt. That'll get it up and out of the way of your winch. I think actually if you're not gonna use a winch, you may not have to move that. So with the shutter motor, I explained earlier, we have this little piece that's gonna fit into this little splined hole. And it's gonna rest like this, assuming that your truck was in the grille shutter open position when you took it apart, and that should be the standard. It's gonna go into this housing, we'll bolt it in place. And so in the open position, the motor itself is the stopper for this pin. Then when it brings itself to the closed position, this little arm will hit the housing. So that simulates both ends of it. So it was in this position when I found it. So I'm gonna install the little arm like this, and I'm gonna use these little bolts to hold it in place, and we're gonna drill a couple holes here. As for placement, it doesn't really matter. I just wanna make sure that I can get the top bolt and the bottom bolt in this same panel without being too close to the edge. Somewhere in this area, I know on my previous installs I was able to see this round hole, but you'll see it really doesn't matter. You're just mounting it here just so it has a place to be. If you have a hybrid, you'll be fighting for space with this little speaker, so you may have to move it a little bit more to the passenger side. I like something like this, and I'm gonna mark my holes with a marker and drill them out. I've matched my drill bit size to my bolt size. Because the bolt head is so close to the motor, we're not going to use a washer on this side, but we will use the flat washer on the back side. As you tighten this down, you'll notice that you could easily tighten it down so much that you break this little ear off. That's why we've given you nylocks. You're only going to make it snug. Okay, that's all there is to that. We'll make sure and plug this back in when we reinstall the front clip. We do have one little metal spot to trim. That's this. And the only real reason we're trimming it is because our bumper is so high clearance that this is exposed. So I'm gonna show you how to mark it. You've got these grounds here. These are important. We're just gonna flip it upside down. So save that bolt. And we're gonna release these little tabs that hold it in place. And we'll zip tie the wire up in a minute. But we're basically just gonna turn this right upside down. We'll reinstall that after we make our cut. I'm gonna tuck this out of the way for a minute while I make my cut. So we know we wanna keep this mounting point, but we're basically gonna slice up diagonally and get rid of anything else that's not necessary. So I'm gonna give myself just maybe about a 1/4 inch here. This is arbitrary, okay? So it doesn't really matter exactly where you cut it, but you can see this back piece of steel here kind of sticking out. I'm not gonna cut through the double layered part, so I'm gonna stop my cut so that it kind of goes right through there where that double layer part begins. And I'll start about a 1/4 inch away here. So something like that. Again, not critical. We're just getting rid of this part that you'd be able to otherwise see. I'm gonna hit this with a paint pen so it doesn't rust. We're gonna do the same thing on the other side, and then don't forget to reinstall your grounds. Again, this is upside down compared to the way they were. And then before we're done, I'm gonna zip tie these up, maybe like that. I think that'll look the cleanest. All right, it's time to put on the winch cradle. Now, we do have these spacers, and that's because you can see these two lower mounting points. They're bumped out from the main surface of this frame end by about a 1/4 of an inch. So we've got this 1/4 inch spacer that we're gonna slide onto this stud before we put the bolts in. I think it'll kind of just hang there for us while we get it started. I've got my hardware laid out. You're gonna use these factory bolts that have the kind of purple finish in the lower 2 holes, and you'll use the grade 8 7/16 bolts that we supply in the top 2 and the inside 2. I'm gonna start a couple of the lower bolts just because I can do them with one hand. Then I'm gonna put the bolts in through the inside that go through this spacer, because that can be one of the more tricky ones to line up, although it's not a big deal. Once you get a bolt through, it should stay. Like always, I'm gonna put on a flat washer and a lock washer and a nut on the back side. I'm just gonna do this for all the remaining holes till we have used up the hardware. Same thing on the other side. I have all the hardware in before I've tightened anything down, so there's just a little bit of adjustment left to right. So I'm gonna basically pick the center of that adjustment, and before I tighten the bolts down that hold it to the front of the frame, I want to lift it up and snug down the bolts that hold it up. And I'm not going to tighten them completely, but I am going to snug them down so it doesn't fall. Now that it's basically up as high as it will go, now I'm going to tighten down the factory 2 bolts on each side, followed by all the rest of them. Factory bolts use a 17mm socket, and the grade 8 bolts, the bolt is a 5/8 and the nut is an 11/16. We have all the bolts tight, and there's something I noticed on this truck that I want to point out. Now, I haven't seen it happen yet, but I doubt all these trucks are the exact same. Sooner or later, I'm going to assume that this line might be closer to the winch cradle than it is on our tests. If it is, just firmly and carefully put a slight bend in that line. Now, you don't want to kink it or break anything. And if yours is any closer than that, maybe isolate it with a piece of fuel line with a slit in it or some other sort of protective sleeve, anything you can think. You know, if you're mostly on the highway, I'm not worried about this truck. I don't think that's going to become a problem, but it's just something to look at if yours happens to be closer. Now, at this point, this is the right time to put a winch in. It's one of the great benefits of the hybrid 2-piece bumper. Your winch cradle's exposed. You can drop the winch right in. It's easy to do all your wiring, zip ties, everything like that. We're not going to put a winch in today, but this is definitely the time to do it. And if you want to see just how insanely strong this is, check out our winch pull video on Instagram. Some winches, if they're taller, you might need to slice off the bottom of this bracket to clear the solenoid. I'm not sure if you will or not, but you can see it won't hurt anything if you need to. Now for the fun part, we get to cut it. So we marked everything from the center section outwards. We didn't mark the center because there's no need for a mark. I'm just going to use this as a pointer. We're going to cut right under this bottom edge here of what you could see earlier. So literally we're just going to follow along with the blade exactly under here. So that's really easy. There's no need to mark it. The only other place to mark would be where we come across under this radar sensor. So I'm just going to use a straight edge to connect basically this rib here to this rib in as straight of a line as I can. So what I'm going to do is cut right along my line. I'll cut under here, and then we'll put it on the truck and mount the bumper. So this is basically going to be our test. I know that this is exactly where I need to cut. This one's easy. This will be our one and only cut in the middle. But out here, there's a decent chance that I'll at least need to straighten it up or maybe even raise it up just a little bit. So especially on this center section, be careful because this will be your final cut. I'm going to start right here by the fog light at the beginning of the painted part of my cut and work my way out. You'll feel with your plunge cutter that this is several layers deep here. Go ahead and cut all the way through it. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side so that I kind of meet in the middle. And the only real reason I chose this order is just so I didn't have what was cut kind of falling off and prying on what wasn't cut. So the middle is supported by the table, so I'm just going to do it last. I'm going to pick up where I left off and cut across the center. As you may know from using one or watching somebody use one, this is where this type of tool, this oscillating tool, really shines. As you can imagine, there's almost no way to do this with any other type of tool. A cutoff wheel would absolutely butcher this area, and plus a cutoff wheel slings hot plastic all over you, and you run the risk of getting really hurt. This is an extremely safe tool, and you can really maneuver it around all the corners. And if you don't want to buy a battery-operated one, you can get these dirt cheap at stores like Harbor Freight that are a corded version. At this point, I'll find that there's usually a couple spots that are still connected, meaning I didn't get it completely cut all the way through, and it looks like it's really just right here in the middle. There it is. I'm pretty happy with this cut overall, although I can see a few little things I'm going to touch up now. I drifted uphill a little bit as I cut this center, so I'm going to trim this side to match. No big deal. I like to go ahead and peel off the little hardened pieces of plastic that had melted throughout the cut. And then, remember when I said it was several layers thick over here? Well, my blade was plunged in at just a fine angle for cutting, but the way the bumper sits, I need to cut through straight this way. So this backing piece actually hangs down a little low, so I'll need to go through and trim that inside piece just a little bit higher. Our preliminary cut is done. Now we're going to take this wiring harness and transfer it over to the bumper so we can reattach our parking sensors. There's a couple different ways you can do it. You can separate the sensor housing from the sensor. These tabs just pry apart on each side and the housing comes off. But I think it's easier to keep all as one. It's actually easier just to snap the harness back to the grille after the bumper's installed. So there are only a few points holding it on. It's plugged into this radar sensor and it's plugged into your camera. Other than that, there's just 3 or 4 of these snap-in zip tie things per side. So I'm going to take these off and then we'll attach this to the actual bumper. You'll need to remember which side is driver's side and which side is passenger side. In our case, I'm just going to lay it on the table the way it came out, and I'll put the bumper in the same spot. Let's talk cable management. In order to keep it clean, we've put holes in the mounting ribs of these bumpers. So I've already done the passenger side. I've routed it through so that the far right parking sensor can reach. Now you will have to unplug the actual parking sensor to pass these through. And also, in order to get this big passenger side set of plugs through, I had to pull off these little clips, and they just kind of slide out once you pull a tab. So we'll do the driver's side. The only thing we'll have to do for the driver's side is unplug the sensor. These little clips are notorious for being very, very tight, so I'm going to have this pick help me lift up on that. There. I'll have to take this off as well. I'm also going to run it through the hole in this rib. So we're about right spacing wise. Yeah, I think that looks good. I'll connect my parking sensor back. Now we're going to install our parking sensor housings. So before I actually put the tape on, take the time to clean off as much of the lumpy part of the tape that's left over as possible. I've already done this one and it's pretty flat and smooth. And you'll notice when you put it in the hole for the sensor, there's just a little bit of play all the way around it, so you're going to want to come around to the front side as you tape it and make sure that it's centered in the hole. The other thing to look at is you want it basically parallel with the top of the bumper. You don't want it tilted one way or the other because that might throw off the sensor. I'm going to start with our roll of VHB tape, got a little piece, and we'll put a piece about like that on either side. I find that getting the corner started on this stuff is the hardest part. I'm going to use my finger as a guide and I'm going to hold it on the front of the sensor, and while I'm looking in this side I'm going to make sure that it's relatively parallel. Then I'll come around to the front and make sure I've got it nice and centered so that little silicone ring doesn't get caught on the edge. So one more time I'll check that it's parallel, then I'll mash both sides down and it should be good to go. And we'll do that on the other three. Okay, we're all sensored up, and now we're going to use this little wire hider chase that I talked about. In order to get it tucked in there, we're going to cut off these big bulky clips that we no longer need. Be careful that you don't cut into your wires. But we do not need these anymore. Honestly, I could have cut them off from the beginning and the harness would have been easier to work with. Especially the large part. You may not be able to get the little harness tucked as well because it does need to come up in line with the plug. But the big part of the harness for sure. So I'm going to run the cable tie down through the back hole. You know what? Scratch that. I'm going to run it this way. It'll look a lot cleaner on the top side. There, so that will remain now invisible from the front. And if we want, later we can tuck this one down in there with a small cable tie, but I'm going to worry about getting the rest of these ties on there first. To get these more inner ones, it's a little tricky to get them started, so I like to kind of pre-bend my zip tie just a little bit to help it find its way up through the first time. I'm going to bend it the other way so it finds its way back out towards me. There we go. This looks really awkward in the video because I'm trying to keep my hands out of the way so you can see it's not too bad in real life. There we go. So we'll do that on the other side as well. We have the center section buttoned up, and then I'm just going to coil up the harness for the factory fogs since we won't be using it. Just going to wrap it in a little coil and zip tie it to the other part of the harness so it won't cause us any trouble. Speaking of fog lights, if you're installing fog lights in your bumper, now is the easiest time to put them in, especially if you're going to try to wire them up to the factory harness. Everything's right here. We're not doing fog lights as a part of today's installation, but now is an easy time to do it. You can also do it after the bumper's on because it's pretty open back here, but it might be just a little bit easier like right now. Next, we'll cut the fender flares, and we'll do that on the truck because there's no other reason to take them off the truck. I'm going to cut the outside layer, then when it comes time to cut the inside, I'm just going to use this flat edge as a guide and just visualize this being planar with the outer cut. All right, now we're going to put this on, not permanently because we may take it off. It'll basically hang on some little tabs right here by each bolt hole. Also, make sure to grab the harness for the little motor that we bolted up earlier and route it up top with the rest of them. And you're going to need to make sure that the outer sides go inside the fender flare. We're not doing a final install here, but I am going to bring this up high enough to hook in the little notches. Don't have to really slam it in, but get it in place. Now we're ready to put the bumper on for a test fit, and this is really just to test our cut. When we put it on, 2 of your wiring harnesses will be outside the winch cradle, so you just let them dangle. And this, you want to make sure that as you install it, it at least gets tucked over the winch cradle so it doesn't get pinched between the bumper and the winch cradle. Okay, so it'll rest there. I'm going to grab some hardware, and I'm not going to tighten anything down, but I'm going to get it into place close enough to see if I like my cut. So this is good. This tells me that the cut was nice and flat because I don't have any bad gaps anywhere, but I want to be able to raise the bumper up just a little bit more, and I can't because it's touching. So I'm just going to take an even, maybe between 1/8 and 1/4. Whatever I decide, I'll try to make it the same all the way around from this point all the way to here, and about the same as I come down this angle. So the easiest way to do that is to just make sure you're holding your marker the same and just let it drag along the top of the bumper. You'll get a nice straight line that way. It's going to be a little trickier over here where it's kind of flatter material, but same concept. Also, don't forget we have some edge trim to put on this, so don't feel like it has to be perfect. You've got some breathing room when it comes to this cut. Okay, I'll do the same thing on the other side. I've only got 2 bolts in this bumper. I'll take them out, set the bumper down, and I'll make this next cut my final cut. I'll do my very best work. I'll clean up the edges and I'll stick the edge trim on all in one go, and then I'll do the final installation of this bumper. We have our cut the way we like it and we're ready for edge trim. I'm going to point out one more time that this inner layer back behind this piece needs to be cut up as high as your outer layer, otherwise it's what's going to bump up against the bumper. Now up here I've got it cut back, here I've got it cut up as far as it can, and if you're doing this install you'll know what I mean. It kind of levels out and you can't cut up any higher. But it's not going to stick down at this point, and that's what matters. So the edge trim is only going to go on the painted plastic. So you're not going to put edge trim on your fender flare, and you're not going to put edge trim on this little accent piece. And one thing I like to do with the edge trim is trim it on the angle of whatever it's meeting up against. This one's pretty, perpendicular, but this one is on a bit of an angle. So we'll do this one first. I'm going to do my best to match that angle when I cut this piece so it looks complete when it's on there. Pick an end and start installing it. Now, this is a compound angle for the edge trim. We're actually going to stop when we get to this point so it doesn't have to round the corner, because what you'll find is when it rounds the corner it's going to bulge out anyway and not look very good. So for our purposes it's going to look best just to cut it at this corner. Now as it rounds this corner, in order to get it to stay where you want it, you may need to grab a heat gun. You'll get a much better result in this specific area, keeping that as a sharp corner, and then also being able to round that edge if you put a little heat to it. Give it some heat, massage it in place, and kind of hold it as it cools, and that should reshape that edge trim to basically be formed to the bumper. Okay, and I'll pick it back up over here. So again, it's not really going to like making this last angle, so I'm just going to not fight it and start it at the next one. We're now ready for the actual final install of this bumper. Just for clarity, I didn't mention earlier, but these are the same bolts that we used to mount the winch cradle to the frame. I personally like to install them from the inside facing out. I just think it's the easiest to get the hardware on the back side of the bolt, and I like to reach right through the airflow hole, and it's pretty easy just to feel the slot that they're going into. And I'm going to go ahead and put all 4 per side in because they'll just stay by themselves. Then on the back side we'll do flat washer, lock washer, and nut like always. Okay, at this point I have all the hardware in and hand tight, and I'm not going to do the final adjustment until after I've totally buttoned down this bumper cover because I don't want that to shift and then affect my gap. So if you'll remember, there was a little Phillips screw right here. So I'm going to get that back in, and this fender flare snaps into place. Then the liner will come back in, and on this liner we will trim it in just a little bit. But for now I'm going to get it screwed back in place. We had this little tab holding the fender flare in up here, and then the last one that we actually can put back is facing forward. The rest of the bolting spots got cut off. Same thing on this side. Adjusting this bumper is really easy. When we put the winch cradle on the frame originally, we centered it left to right. If you have a discrepancy and you need to shift the bumper left or right, you'll need to go back to the winch cradle stage, but I've actually never seen that on these trucks. Then you have up and down, the tilt, and a little bit of in and out. And really the in and out on these trucks is really all that's gonna need to be adjusted. Everything else will kind of set itself. What I like to do is make sure I have a smooth flow from the radius of this flare into the bumper. So too far back and it looks silly, too far forward and it looks silly. So I like to bring it just where it's a nice continuous curve. I'll do the same thing on the other side. I'll tighten down a couple of the bolts, and assuming it hasn't moved, I'll go ahead and tighten the rest of them down. If it had moved, I'll adjust as necessary and then retorque everything. Everything's tightened down, it looks good, I'm really happy with it all. Now we want to trim the excess wheel liner here. So on the driver's side, I'm really just going to come from the bottom of the washer reservoir because I don't want to cut above that obviously. So once I get past the reservoir, I'm just going to draw a line up to basically the bottom of the bumper, and then we'll tuck the rest of it in. So this is most easily done with a razor blade, a good sharp one in my opinion. Once I get it started. It cuts really easily once you get it going. And I'm cutting right towards myself, which they'll tell you in Boy Scouts not to do, but at least this way I can see a straight line. The little corner will tuck behind there, and there's already a good bolt basically right behind the washer reservoir that is going to keep this from hitting the tire. The passenger side is the same, although I started all the way at the frame rail to make my diagonal cut, and then I took one of the bolts that we took out and didn't reuse, and I used it to secure the liner into a weld nut that already exists there. And all I did was put a tiny little plus-shaped cut with the razor, or you could drill a hole and then tighten it down with the bolt that we are reusing. The rest of the wiring harness that we pulled out of the grill, we're going to run back up to the top and plug back in. So its plug was right here. And we can even reuse the little clips that held it in place. Really hard to see because it's so dark down in there, but a lot of the little clips will go right back in place. Same thing on this bigger harness on this side. Let's see, that one goes there. This one goes here. Is the grill shutter. And I'm gonna reach back in here and snap the little holders in place again, just like I did the other one. The front camera and the radar for the TSS. That one is for the camera. Now we're going to button the top back up. Now these neat little clips that we started with, you have to reset them. So push from the bottom back up and they'll reset and they'll look extra tall. Put them in place and then push them back down flush again. It's a really cool design. If you had the active grill shutters, which we took out, you'll notice there are a couple little spots that won't be reused. That's okay. You'll just have some clips left over. And that's got it wrapped up. Like I always say, go back through and make sure that you've tightened down all your bolts and then go on a quick test drive and verify functionality of all your sensors. Appreciate you guys watching. If you have any questions, reach out to us at backwoodsadventuremods.com.